I have been apart and I have lost my way. The archons have taken my vision. At times I am filled with thee, but often I am blind by thy presence, when all I see is this world of form. My ignorance and blindness are all I have to offer, but these I give to thee, holding back nothing. And in my hours of darkness, when I am not sure there even is a thou, hearing my call, I still call to thee with all my heart. Hear the cry of my voice, clamoring from this desert, for my soul is parched and my heart can barely stand this longing. And those are the visionary words of poetic primeval wisdom, the heartfelt sighs of fragments of a faith almost forgotten, from our astral guest, and that is Rosamond Miller, Bishop of the Ecclesia Gnostica Mysteriorum, or also known as the Gnostic Sanctuary, a place famed for being a spiritual oasis for thirsty and weary pilgrims of the Heilig Saharas. And Rosamond's sublime words are just the genesis of a very penetrating and provocative foraging of Gnosis like we've never done before.
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And yes, this is Aeon Byte, broadcast from the virtual Alexandria through the GodAboveGod.cam. Also your weekly spiritual oasis from Heilig Saharas, the deserts of the real, where you can rest for a spell or two before re-entering the maelstroms of society and conformity, where you can go down to the glowing marble streets of the state of mind where East meets West, perhaps rescue Hypatia from the Christian mob, converse with Philo or Clement about the nature of the cosmic logos, share a pint of Guinness with a therapeutic, or just argue with Basilides and Carpocrates about the duality of the Pleroma and the Canoma while playing a friendly game of Bioshock.
A more perfect stage could not be asked for.
The districts of the virtual Alexandria are endless like the canyons of your imagination. Maybe you can join an alchemy workshop with the Hermeticists and their ancient Egyptian lore. Attend an election party after Simon Magus is voted as the true successor of John the Baptist over Dositheus. Watch him give a Howard Dean scream because he doesn't know that orthodoxy will eventually wash his victory away. Hide his lover Elena as it has done with both Shekinah and Hagia Sophia. So much to do at the virtual Alexandria, my beloved truth seekers. Take cell phone pictures of the Temple of Serapis for your Facebook account. Participate in a scavenger hunt to find the genitals of Attis. Dance the night away in the mysteries of Horus or Diana. Or just spend quiet hours at the universal internet cafe called the Library of Alexandria, where the ancient wonders of the Chaldeans, the Pythagoreans, and the Hindu Brahmin come alive from scrolls and codexes. So much to do at the virtual Alexandria.
Can't you see all around you the dragon's breath?
But come closer, near the harbor of dreams, alongside the Phoenician cutters. Sit down by the sparkling fountains of Hermes Trismegistos and the other forgotten gods, like you do every week, and listen to the saints of blasphemy and the sages of heresy offer you the milk and honey of the wisdom of the ages. Let their words purify you with theological alternatives you never knew about because you've been wandering the Heilig Saharas and deserts of the real for so bloody long.
It's the weirdest thing. I feel like I've been in a coma for about 20 years, and I'm just now waking up.
I am Abraxas, the steward of the virtual Alexandria, your host of hosts. making sure your stay here is as hell-bent and heaven-exiled as it can possibly be. Welcome with kindness and love, Gnostics and lovers of the esoterica and recalcitrant freethinkers. Rest by the sparkling fountains. Listen to this program's saint of blasphemy and sage of heresy, our astral guests.
We are dreamers, shapers, singers, and makers.
Yeats once wrote that man cannot know the truth, only embody it. And Bishop Rosamond Miller certainly embodies the truth, and as you will see, perhaps Gnosis as well. You will travel long and hard before you can find such an exemplary individual who has committed their existence to shining the knowledge of the heart into the darkness of mere being. You see, the Gnostic revival has ignited a resurgence of Gnostic Bethels, and many misconceptions about them, their liturgy, and sacraments that we will address soon.
O Lord, bless this thy hand grenade, that with it thou mayst blow thine enemies to tiny bits in thy mercy.
One of the biggest flames is Rosamond's Ecclesia Gnostica Mysteriorum in Mountain View, California, founded in the 70s and still going sinfully strong. The Gnostic Sanctuary, as it is called again, is highly regarded by many stripes of occultists, esotericists, and scholars. The great and late and wonderful Jungian analyst June Singer was part of her congregation, my beloved true seekers. And week after week, Bishop Miller has sacrificed her essence to the spread of religious autonomy, as well as offer physical assistance to the downtrodden and sick.
A man who won't stand up for his own principles is not really a man at all.
Rosamond is also a member of the Holy Order of Mary Magdalene, an ancient sisterhood with direct lineage to the woman with the alabaster jar. It was not something she chose, but was chosen for by this arcane society. Yet we chose not to approach this in the interview because whenever mentioned, the Da Vinci vultures of sensationalism come swooping down and cheapen her overall ministry, which she likes to keep introverted and humble. But if you're interested in the Holy Order of Mary Magdalene and everything about the Ecclesia Gnostica Mysteriorum, just check out Rosamond's website at GnosticSanctuary.org. Again, GnosticSanctuary.org. All the questions you need to know will be answered there.
Careful, Chief. You dig up the past, all you get is dirty.
And like I said in the beginning, Rosamond will soon grant us as close as you can get to actually holding the concept of Gnosis in your archon-scarred hands. And I'm not whistling KKK Dixie here. You see, my beloved true seekers, and I've certainly been guilty of this, since Aeon Byte is also my self-discovery as well as yours, Gnosis is not truly enlightenment. It's not truly salvation. It's not truly satori. It's not truly mysticism, although it does overlap with all of these sacred end zones. And Gnosis has been kept a secret more than likely because, beyond its inability to be expressed like the extroverted religion's marketing schemes, it's just not as palatable as the other means of divine orgasm.
Relax, those pious morons are too busy talking to their phony baloney god.
Most cats expect the usual metaphysical screenplay. You know how it goes. Going through a hard time in my life, searching for more than I have. My religion sucks Gorgon eggs. And then, whoa, wham bang thank you, holy spigot. I found Deepak's chakra or Gaia's fat ass or Buddha's watered down message in a vat of New Age Kool-Aid. And hey, I'll just keep on trucking along life's sanitized highways. I'll never be alone. I'll do so much good and people will love me for it. I have made it to Hollywood, Simon Peter. Hallelujah, Tony Robbins and Joel Osteen.
And we can't argue with destiny now, can we?
But deep inside, I think we all know that this is just satanic denial, kismet-arrested development, setting yourself up to allow Jehovah to hit your face with a frying pan as soon as you turn another tragedy-filled corner in your life. Turn you into a bitter Barbra Streisand, or have you slide into a dogmatic collectiveness that will gain you the world, but ultimately lose your own soul, and lose yourself further in the wheel of karma, the Ouroboros.
What's God? Well, you know, when you want something really bad and you close your eyes and you wish for it, God's the guy that ignores you.
Like Rosamond says, Gnosis is reverse enlightenment, and I've alluded to this without finding the correct term. Self-knowledge, true celestial awakening, allowing yourself to embody the truth, is the beginning of your end. It is both recognizing the light as well as truly embracing the dark. It is entering the dim woods of uncertainty where you will battle Nietzsche's dragon with "thou shalt not" written on each scale.
There is no freedom without the law.
Gnosis is never having a home to call your own while you're in the flesh. Gnosis is opening up Pandora's box where your most dreaded fears and insecurities will flutter out and torment you like teasing harpies until you feed them the fruits of your compassion. Gnosis is the permanent dark night of the soul. All you thought was a solid foundation in your life crumbles. All you thought was valuable loses its luster. All your loves and friends and family will become just deja vu strangers because you have awoken to all possible realities as well as all false realities.
Well, have you considered the possibility that you're simply not meant to be happy no matter where you are?
No, I haven't. Not until you mentioned it.
And nothing will ever be the same when you experience that knowledge of the heart that ultimately breaks your heart forever. Breaks it to be willingly shared like the body of Christ with the entire cosmos.
But tonight, we dine in hell!
In Gnosticism, personal growth or repentance or confessing to Dr. Phil are afterthought methods to the real adventure. What is true change is what is known as the metanoia, the turning about in Greek, when we realize we are darkness and we are trapped in darkness and slowly, very slowly, face and make our way towards the Godhead, not fighting the darkness, but swimming through it, even as it takes our spiritual breath away. Calling out to kindred soul sparks to join us in a migration through punishing heavens and hells.
Every man carries a circle of hell around his head like a halo. Every man has to go through hell to reach his paradise.
The Passion of Sophia reflects this, as it reflects those of us who have tasted the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. Sapientia, as she is called in Latin, was cast out of the pleroma for different reasons depending on the Gnostic mythos. Disconnected with the ultimate source, she underwent despair, isolation, delirium, and all manner of grim emotions, giving birth to horrible entities she needed to face.
Everybody is stuck with the things that they're not proud of.
But eventually, Hagia Sophia called out to the light, and the light called out to her. And she rose slowly towards the eternal realm of the Sethians, lips full of prayer and spell, hands reaching out in humility and supplication, and even defeat, tear-stained eyes dreamy for what this fallen aeon knew she was once, the bride of Christ and part of the mind of God. It was an arduous, brutal process that never denied the chaos was there, and, in some narrations, Sophia accepted that part of her would always be part of the chaos.
I reveal myself to myself, and I am drenched and purged.
And that is just one of many stories of the tragedy and triumph of the divine spark, my beloved true seekers.
What if this is as good as it gets?
Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave.
But enough of my drivel. Rosamond Miller, Bishop of the Ecclesia Gnostica Mysteriorum, on Aeon Bight, doing a far better task at explaining the holy dangers of knowing the unknown that I could ever do, and a better job when she recites the passage I did at the beginning. You know, when you were sane before I started babbling.
Are you like a crazy person?
I'm quite sure they will say so.
Enjoy your stay at the virtual Alexandria. So much to do, so little time. The saints of blasphemy and sages of heresy wait for you to listen to them. Welcome to that dream of you. This is the Aeon Bight interview, and with us we have the pleasure of having Rosamond Miller. How are you doing today, Rosamond?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
You mentioned the other day to me that you first found Gnosis and then Gnosticism found you. Could you tell us of your first experience of Gnosis and how your life emanated from there, like the pleroma itself?
Well, I don't know if Gnosticism found me, but Gnosticism, I became acquainted with Gnosticism later. Originally, the experiences of union, I'm not talking about psychic experiences or visions or anything like that, but a unity experience. And those experiences that have been occurring since not very dramatically, I thought them were very naturally, sincerely, childhood, and more dramatically later, but they were without a name. I knew what that was, but I didn't have any names for it. I didn't even use the name God. I was curious when I was young, when I would hear God and say, I wonder if they're talking about that something else. But I never thought they needed naming. Even the term experience is misleading because it implies an experiencer. And when these things have been happening, there was not a personal identity there that I can call myself, that I can say after the experience. But during them, there was no one there to experience them. There was just that. Then later on in my life, I came across some of the Gnostic material, some extant Gnostic material. I was in my maybe late teens and early 20s. And I recognized myself, I recognized my own experiences, the resonance I found in some of the words of the Gospel of Thomas, for instance, and some of the Gnostic materials that I found at the time. And I found this is exactly it. That is what is happening. Meanwhile, before the Gnostics, I have also found this resonance in the words of some mystics of various traditions whom I adopted as my mentors, because I felt that they had given a language to something that I could not clothe in language. Particularly, there was a poem by St. John of the Cross, and a particular translation, because most translations of a poem are not worth reading. But this one is by Willis Barnstone, and the poem is called I Enter Where I Did Not Know. That, and later on, when I learned about the Gnostics and when I read a lot of the material, St. John of the Cross was truly a Gnostic, but I wonder if he had ever even heard the name, because Gnosis comes first, and then when one writes about it, then that becomes, it could become something like Gnosticism, another ism.
Yeah, Rosamund, as we talked a few minutes ago, most people assume that Gnosis itself is something akin to enlightenment or something like self-actualization. But as we both agree, Gnosis leads us to some dark places, doesn't it? I mean, like St. John of the Cross himself, he went through a very dark place, and so did Teresa de Avila, so did Master Eckhart, so did all of them.
Yes. That is a common characteristic of Gnostics and mystics. Sometimes, to the chagrin of a lot of people, not always, not in all instances, but Gnosis and mystical experience, they overlap. And just about all mystics and Gnostics do go through certain experiences of going into the depths of their own darkness, I would say. The whole thing is that we stay right there if we think that that's all there is, because I consider that sort of a reverse enlightenment. Instead of feeling that you are so totally one and into the light, one can experience a tremendous sense of separation and alienation at first. There is a term, and I don't know if I will be using it right, but it hits me right, and just for this conversation, that some mystery schools have used the term the guardians of the threshold. And so before entering into any of the, I could call more Gnostic candies or theological candies, one has to face first the entrance through those gateways. And in those gateways, everything that we have had that somehow, whether it is our own sorrows or fears or anything, I'm not going to characterize them, they just come up. They remind me of Kali also, with all her skulls hanging from her belt. And one goes there with wanting something beyond, with a preconceived idea, with an agenda. Somehow those things can be very frightening, but at the very least they can be very depressing. That is a step. The only thing I can say, that's not all there is. That is just like a sheaf with a hand up, but wait, that's not all there is. Now, why am I using Hindu metaphors when we're talking about Gnosticism?
But having Gnosis, and that's, I think, the scary part, is that not only do you find the truth, but you find that so much is untrue, including what you are, right?
Everything that we were sure of is untrue. I had one of my own experience, perhaps one of the most dramatic ones, that was early on in my life. Not very early. For me, when I was a teenager, that wasn't really very early. That many things I have been experiencing that territory. But it was experience to be into a complete state of tremendous fear and darkness. Well, I don't want to dwell in it in this interview, but there was a part when I was in a political prison, and in a foreign country, of course. So, and the experiences of feeling totally in the darkness, and any of the things, even that I had experienced, that had nothing to do with any belief system, that has nothing to do with any type of image I have made of divinity or of God or help, none of those things helped. I was left completely without handholds, without footholds, just completely tumbling in what I would call metaphorically a darkness. And from there is really the most important thing for me is that I could not even find a way out. There is, when you are into this darkest space, there is not just a road that you can follow, like sometimes a metaphor of a tunnel, that you go through a tunnel and find a little bit of the light at the end of it. Well, there is no tunnel, there is no light, there is out of that state, it would be just as easy to get out as it would be taking a spaceship and going to another planet. That distance, it was so distant from everything that I have experienced before. I even doubted everything that formed part of my life at that time. And it was by not running away from it, by eventually going even deeper into that state of consciousness, going deeper into darkness, is when somehow the light itself came. And that doesn't mean that the light, I consider it permanent, because I feel that this is a permanent state for all of us. But it's not something that we can say as long as we have a human body. This is it, and I am not subject to any of these things anymore. I think that the time that we say this, we have really lost sight of who we are, of what we are in this physical existence. We are always subject to going into many dark holes, dark spots. But there is a way that one learns, at least for myself, that whenever these things have happened, I have, how could I say, become used. Not learned, it's not something learned, acquired a knack, as it were, to dance in those dark states, to dance with the darkness, and out of it, by not having any ulterior motives, not trying to go on a fishing expedition to try to be rescued, but just simply, well, if that's it. Somehow that peace have brought me beyond that, but always into a state that has been higher and deeper and more luminous, even if one can quantify as more or less luminous. But every time it's like it has never had been before. So more so than it has ever been before, more complete, more pervasive of into my own being. It's not all light. Our human psyche is capable of going in so many directions. So we can be very optimistic, but not all the experiences are totally of light.
So what would you advice would you have to somebody, because this is akin to the notion of despair, which is very frowned upon in, the Judeo-Christian traditions. Would you say when you despair to simply embrace this despair?
Well, I felt at first I was so shocked and terrified that I don't even know if despair is the right word. Probably it is. It's a hopelessness, a sense of hopelessness that turned into a sense of acknowledging the state in which I found myself, and then acknowledging not just the psychological state, but the physical condition in which I was in. The knack that I acquired later on, because at first when I came out of it and came out in a very dramatic manner from being into the depths of darkness, it's like being lifted into a state of grace and anointment and union and love, where there was no room for anything else but that love and that awareness of a oneness over underlying all things, even those people that were the cause of, at least the immediate cause of that state, that were able to catalyze that state of, if you want to call it despair, that was inside me. It's just something just exploded inside that was like a big bang of brightness and of light. Then I spent a number of years trying to figure out how that was, how I could bring that again to understand the details of it, and doing the post-mortem of the whole thing. Where I found out in that is that through many different other experiences in my life, that tremendous freedom, incredible freedom, yes, that's a word I could use, that comes in when suddenly it's not just that it's not despair and it's not resignation. It's just simply just look at it and where I am and drop that expectation and demand that life and my surroundings should be other than it is. And it does not mean that if I have the power to make changes, that I won't try to make changes, but it means that I'll try to do whatever I can, but I'm still okay in that state of peace, being all right with whatever happens, even as I take some actions, even as I initiate some new movements. There is a quietness in the mind, a serenity that does not have any attachment to the outcome. And it's to be able to stay in there, to acknowledge that state, but without any expectation. And then what has been, I don't know if that's with everybody, but has been my personal experience, as that there is acceptance. By acceptance, I don't mean that I have to like it. I don't have to like it, but I don't have to dislike it neither. It's just that that's what it is. There is suddenly finding myself completely in that moment, and something else emerges beyond that has nothing to do with whatever is happening around me, has nothing to do with whatever state I have been in. It's just a lifting up. So I don't know if that's very helpful, but it is to me.
Rosamund, can you briefly tell us how you established the Ecclesia Gnostica Mysterium?
Mysteriorum.
Mysterium, sorry.
Yes, no, we say Mysteriorum. I have been, most of my life, I'm always allergic to belonging to any churches or to any dogmas or to anything. But I have a group. I have been having, throughout most of my life, a number of people that we will get together and we'll talk about these things. I didn't realize till many years later that they somehow consider me sort of a little bit of their guide or the center of this group. And it came a time that the people I was meeting with, they thought that it would be nice to have a place where we can have celebrate our mysteries and mythologies and give classes, etc. And at first I balked at the idea, and for a few years I was just simply, not that I totally rejected it, but I just wasn't too keen on that idea. Later on, in the 70s, a vision began to emerge out of the demand for a neutral place to meet. But I said, but what place can it be? A church, of course, because I have been ordained and consecrated, and what did these things come to me, maybe where I could use them to. And I did celebrate a number of Eucharists before in different houses with different people. But a place, it had to be a place where I would like to go to. What kind of organization or church would I go to? First of all, it has to be a place that is not an organization. It could be in order, it could be called something, but it would have no memberships, a place where no one could convert to it, a place where people will not be considered given a dogma and fed some particular belief system, but a place of inquiry where individuals would be free to inquire without somebody telling them that they are wrong or that they are sinners or they shouldn't even ask, or telling the way things are, which I think every individual deep down inside, I have called it for years, an enlightenment gene. Later on, when I found out about a name for it like Gnosis, then I call it the Gnosis gene. I think that we are hardwired for that. And what we need is to find a community where we can that will be friendly to permit us to explore and have that emerge within ourselves, not imposed from the outside, but something that is born from within, that we become then more ourselves than we were before. And that's how I started the Ecclesia Gnostica Mysteriorum. Actually, it's called, the legal name is Church of Gnosis. After all, we're here in the United States and we speak English, so I felt that people get all, the tongue gets all twisted. But I left in parentheses underneath Ecclesia Gnostica Mysteriorum, which means Gnostic Church or Gnostic Temple of the Mysteries. I call it a refuge for spiritual travelers, like a way station.
Yeah, and Rosamund, many listeners are not familiar with the more, for lack of better words, libertine or fluid Gnostic ecclesiastical praxis. As a comparison, how are your rituals different from, let's say, Catholic or Anglican masses? Because a lot of people they might walk into a Gnostic church and say, oh, well, this is the same as a Catholic church. I'm leaving,
Well,
What's different?
Yeah, some things look similar, but only look. Like we have an altar, we have flowers, and we use incense and appropriate candles and all these things, that these things are not because of any kind of believing that they are really necessary, but they help us to quiet the mind and to put us in a receptive state to go into a ritual which is like going through a poem, but it's more than that. And then at the center of the Eucharist, we do have a consecration of bread and wine that differs from the Catholic and Anglican consecration of bread and wine, and from the Protestant too. There is also communion, but apart from that, everything else is completely different parts of the text that I use in the Eucharist. I did write the Eucharist, and part of it has a portion of the Gnostic Gospels, part of the Mary Magdalene Gospel. A lot of that, the putting it together, is my own writings and my own prayers, but it is very different in content. Anyone that listens to the words and they realize that it has no resemblance to the Catholic or liberal Catholic or Episcopalian churches. So maybe I could read you some portions of it.
Yes, how about the poem you read me before?
Oh, the surrender. Yes.
The surrender poem, yes, please do.
Well, after we begin an invocation, which, let me just tell you 4 lines of the invocation. That is how we start. Out of the fullness came he, who without speaking yet spake his name, and it was unknown to all but him, and she, whose womb is the gateway to all the worlds. And then it goes for a couple of pages, and then there is a part of that we prepare for the ritual, the surrender, and we each recite this that I wrote out of my own personal experiences. I have been apart, and I have lost my way. The archons have taken my vision. At times I am filled with thee, but often I am blind to thy presence, when all I see is this world of form. My ignorance and blindness are all I have to offer, but this I give to thee, holding back nothing. And in my hours of darkness, when I am not even sure there is a thou hearing my call, I still call to thee with all my heart. Hear the cry of my voice, clamoring from this desert, for my soul is parched, and my heart can barely stand this longing. And that is a prayer that we say that.
Very beautiful. Yeah, very beautiful.
I think it's a prayer that we say at a particular point. Then later on in the Eucharist, and as I said, all of this is different, but then probably the time does not allow it to go through the whole of it, but that is found in the Gnostic Sanctuary website, it's all in there. But there is a part here in the dedication that says, eternal presence, whose lightest touch is ecstasy to creatures and gods alike. We accept that of which, by the nature of this planet, we are composed. This has to do with what we were talking earlier. One has to do with that ecstasy and that state of gnosis where all the clouds part and everything makes sense, where there is an understanding that at least I cannot put into words, even though I try and I borrow some and I try some of my own, but really cannot be able, I'm always trying to find better ways to try to communicate, and even though I know that I won't succeed, it can only be the finger pointing at the moon, but we cannot look at the finger, just look beyond that.
Right, of course.
To find what is in there, but I still have to make the effort because I'm in a physical body and we use words to communicate with one another. And I see the words that we use like containers, like capsules that contain something but more rarefied than what you find in a regular capsule like antibiotic or vitamin or anything. And those ones that capsule has to dissolve. And these are the words in order to be able to receive the benefit of what comes in there. So, what we were talking earlier about that state of which is always, to me, has been ecstatic. It has been one state of being totally seized by that something else that I don't know how to call it. God has been so qualified, that word, by so many meanings, while it is a shorthand word of 3 letters that we can use to stand for that. It doesn't mean any of the things that have been associated with the word God. So there is that. The slightest touch, it simply opens everything and an understanding of how things, all the patterns and why we are here, and who are we, and what is this whole mess. But simultaneously, we're in human bodies. Not that the human bodies are less holy. In this one, I have to get a little bit into the Jewish tradition and the Kabbalistic tradition, with a glory of the divine sparks. But the Gnostics have that too, and we are composed of these divine sparks of divinity. But somehow they have been, I'm talking metaphorically, somehow separated, somehow with a lost consciousness of their own nature, and this is what has to be lifted. And therefore, recognizing that in our physical bodies, my bodies are meeting the workings of our brain too, and memories and the fears that we anticipate and the sorrows that they come from the past, then we say we accept that of which by the nature of this planet we are composed. So to me, it is very important accepting the totality of it, that part of me is totally ignorant, does absolutely nothing, and then perhaps perceived with another area of the brain than the ones that we perceive physical reality. We can also are capable of perceive something else too that start crumbling this ignorance. In some of our prayers that we have in the Eucharist, that includes everything for instance, a part says crossing of the gate. And then we invoke the dwellers in the earth, beneath the earth, the rocks and plants and all their seeds, flowers and fruits. And it goes on, and then at the end it says, and we invoke that which is nothing, that which the mind cannot grasp nor comprehend, but only respond in ecstasy and awe, here present, now and forever. But all of the Eucharist is composed of similar texts, and part of them are from the Gnostic Gospels, like one of them which is one of my favorites, before communion, or after communion, which is, I think it's the Gospel of Thomas, I think it's the 18, when it says, when you drink from my mouth, you will become like me. I myself shall become you, and the hidden things shall be revealed to you. And I make a distinction in nouns. I made a decision that when it's a conversation, we are talking to the mystery, to the divine, to God, I use the archaic form of thou and thee. But when we are talking from divinity to us or to each other, I use the regular everyday you. So you have heard inconsistency there. It's actually consistent to the ritual of the Eucharist, as I have prepared.
But Rosamunde, so how do you interpret the actual communion? Are you saying the communion versus other faiths? The communion is, as you say, you and the divine joining together, or do you see it symbolically?
First of all, it has to do with the consecration of bread and wine. In the Catholic Church, it's used the term of transubstantiation, what it means from a profane, a common bread and wine, by the agency of the celebrant, of the priest or bishop, it becomes the body and blood of Christ. For us, that transubstantiation occurs within the consciousness of the individual. Hopefully by what our own receptiveness on what is happening, we can see not only what is happening is being solemnized at the altar with the bread and the wine, but it like veils are lifted, and by our own consecration of our own consciousness, we can see the sacredness that has always been there, but is obscure in matter. So therefore, it's not that we make a physical thing something that it was not before, but it is revealing the divinity in all things. I call it divinity in the flesh. And then at the time of consecration, that this is my body and this is my blood, have the whole congregation say it simultaneously. Is trying to bring about a certain awareness during the time of the ritual that may or may not happen. It does happen to me always, but it may or may not happen to some people or to all the people all the time. It is not just something that happens there at the sanctuary, but it is an awareness that of everything in all our dealings. So if we look at one another, if we look at a dog or a cat, of which we are an interspecies congregation, by the way, or plants or anything, we can all see in their own form, in their own shape, they are all the presence of the divine. Some of us more awake at sometimes less awake, but it has to do with that union. The time of communion symbolizes, is to in a way seal, to bind that awareness, that divinity within us. I'm not talking the ego that says I like this or I like that or I don't believe this or this other, but I'm talking from that something else that binds us together, and from that awareness we bind it at the time of communion. So I don't know, is that made it more confusing?
No, ultimately it's always going to be a mystery. Just do the best we can. What other sacraments do you perform at your church? Do you do like marriage, last rites?
Well,
things like that?
Last rites, yes, and marriage also, but I don't call marriage a sacrament. I call it a rite of passage. We also have a rite of passage for release of relationship. That's also in the website, and for divorce or for release of relationship, and also not only, but then we go to sacraments. It had to do with last rites and baptism, but they are differently worded. In meaning and content, they are a little bit different than what the traditional Christian sacraments are. I call rites of passage things that we pass through. There is a marriage that is that people who somehow they get together and decide, because of their love and their affinity and whatever, dedicate themselves, their life to each other. There is a blessing in that, and a rite of passage. They are accepted as in the community, whether they are married legally or not, because in this case I do perform a lot of weddings that are same-sex too. As we know, same-sex weddings are not legal, but spiritually they have the same validity for us, even though for the state may not have it. So, and this is the same for regular heterosexual couples or same-sex couples. And the one of divorce is one that we perform because a marriage is successful if it ends before they really hate each other. So they can have a successful divorce. Not a failed marriage is one where people hate each other and stay bound to each other like a yoke around their necks. It makes me think of that regular expression that people is going to hate it, but I think in the ball and chain that that it can become. So people know when they stop walking together in the same direction, they can be supportive and nurturing to one another, than to live in love and goodwill and wishing each other every good thing, rather than these acrimonious endings that people have. And this is only if people want to go through that. They don't have to, but it is offered. So the sacraments, it is very much like it says in the Gospel of Philip, 5 of them, the the baptismo, anecrismo, a Eucharist, a releasement, and the bridal chamber. But I consider the bridal chamber, all of them are the bridal chamber, because they bring us to this unity, which is a different kind of marriage. It's the marriage with the divine. It's the recognizing where we come from and acknowledging and freely surrendering in both parts, the part that we consider outside of us, which is the divine, and the part that is of the human. The bridal chamber has to occur first. John of the Cross wrote beautiful things about that in the Living Flame in his poem, The Living Flame of Love. They all are parts and aspects of the bridal chamber. So it's the Eucharist. Our Eucharist is called Ritual of the Bridal Chamber, the Holy Mystery of the Eucharist, Ritual of the Bridal Chamber, the Mystery of Baptism, and so on and so forth. So we do have those sacraments and a number of, as I said before, of rites of passage that we celebrate.
And you are not obviously beholden to any central authority.
No.
It is all you.
No, none whatsoever. That's all me. This is, I think, the only way to keep away from politics, to really carry that vision that I mentioned earlier when you asked me why I founded Ecclesia Gnostica Mysteriorum. It has to be, it's a place where I would have wanted to attend, where nobody tried to control another, no one would like to control the thought of another. I wouldn't qualify it as libertine, but it is free. A person's private life, that's their own. We don't go around with giving rules to anyone. We have enough rules of the land and the rules that our own conscience give us.
And can you tell us a little bit about your acquaintance with the great Jungian analyst June Singer?
Oh, that was very interesting. It was, I think it was 1982 that we met. I received a letter. I had just moved to a new place I was living, asking me about the Gnostic Church, that I heard there was a Gnostic Church in Palo Alto, and if everybody could attend. And I saw in her letterhead, I saw her address and her signature, and the address was the same address from the house I had just moved out of. And then when I saw June Singer, she had just published her book, Androgyny, and I had given, when I opened the Gnostic Sanctuary, one of the early talks that I gave was in her book, Androgyny. So I asked, are you the June Singer, the writer? I think you are. And if you are, I told her I'd given a lecture on her book. I said, also your address, that's the house I just moved out of. And then June found that incredibly synchronistic. She, the first time she went to the sanctuary, I was not there, but she wrote an article called The Necessary Heresy about that experience. And then after that, we met and we became fast friends right away. And she was there at the sanctuary every Sunday, unless she was out of town, until the time came a few years ago that she moved to Cleveland with her husband. But every time that she came to this area, we met her. Sometimes she spent some time with me, but she will always go to the sanctuary. And it was a wonderful time, because she was an incredible woman, and her writings have been very influential to Gnostics and anyone that is looking for awareness. There's one book that she wrote actually for the sanctuary, and that was like all the royalties that she got from the first edition to donate to the sanctuary, and that was the Gnostic Book of Hours. And then she mentions the sanctuary in a number of her books. I can't remember offhand some of the titles, but one of them is Energies of Love, and there were others that she mentions portions of the Eucharist in it that she found that was satisfying to the soul and to the psyche also. So I don't know what more to tell you, that I miss her terribly since she died just a few years ago. We had planned right before she died, she was going to come a week later. She was going to be here in my area, and we had plans to spend some time together. Just a week before then, I get a call from her husband, Irving, that she had died suddenly. It was an aneurysm. She woke up with a terrible headache and taken to the hospital, and then she died. And that was very sad. I think that the world has lost a physical manifestation of somebody that was incredibly spiritual and broad-minded.
And lastly, Gnostic churches are scarce. Understanding Gnosticism is not easy. What advice would you have to an individual who is seeking the knowledge of the heart, or perhaps is seeking a Gnostic community?
If there are no Gnostic communities, and again, what do we mean by Gnostic? Because I personally think there are two things. If one person wants to understand Gnosticism with an ism, there are many works, if they don't have a church close to them that use Gnostic material, there are many works by scholars such as Elaine Pagels and Karen King, Virgin Person, Stefan Holland, a number of men and women who have dedicated their lives and energies to understand what seems a language that seems strange today, but was popular in the culture of the first 4 centuries of Christianity. I think that Carl Jung is perhaps the best interpreter of Gnosticism. However, if somebody is looking for Gnosis, and I make a distinction between Gnosis and Gnosticism, even though others disagree, I will say to read the mystical poetry of those I call my spiritual mentors. One of them, St. John of the Cross, and this poem, I Enter Who I Did Not Know, by the translation by Willis Barnstone. And I will post it to the Sanctuary's website in a few days if anyone is interested in reading that. Then
wonderful.
Also read Daniel Ladinsky's renditions of Hafez. Like Willis Barnstone, the translator, must be more than just a translator and very good with the languages to bring across the spirit of the poems. And Daniel Ladinsky is one of those. He makes Hafez alive and immediate for the seeker of today. Now, purists and scholars may disagree with his renditions, but I'm talking about Gnosis and not about scholarship. I'll also recommend Zen Buddhism, Vedanta, and mystical Hindu masters that you can take, that somehow they can get closer to Gnosis. I find that Buddhism is closer to Gnosis than any of the Christian religions. And rather than beginning getting lost in arcane names and mythologies, although those are full of meaning if you are inclined to inquire beyond just the words of powers, but if what they're looking is really to find what is that something else, there has to be more to life than this, then I would recommend looking through these things. If what a person is seeking Gnosis, they don't need to go to any church or a Gnostic church, not even mine. And Gnosis, I would say, can be found anywhere and everywhere. That knowledge can be somehow trigger anywhere. Nature can lead us to it. Joy leads us to it. Even suffering can lift the veils. And every word we hear and every event is a messenger of Gnosis. It's an invitation to go through these doors. We can call that agency for Gnosis the Holy Spirit, or Sophia, which means a special type of wisdom. She's also called Revealer of the Mysteries Concealed, but it is a knowledge of what is in us and all around us, but people usually don't see it.
Well, very well said. Well, I think that's all the time we have today, Rosamund. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte.
Well, thank you. Very my pleasure. I enjoyed this interview.
contend that no Gnostic library is complete without June Singer's evocative work, A Gnostic Book of Hours. You pretty much won't need a church or community with that book, since it instructs one on how to build an inner monastery of celestial wonders and Gnostic garden mazes. And it's interesting that Rosamond's own pilgrimage led her from Chicago to California. This also happened with both Alan Watts and Philip K. Dick. But I'm not sure I'm ready to make a move to the Moonbat Empire, my beloved truth seekers. The raw coal cement and steel mandatories of Chicago suit me just fine right now. Hellish blizzards and the grit of Midwestern becoming transparent to the transcendental. I no longer contend that Gnosis has to include the mystic experience, but it still requires getting out of your mind and into the nous or daemon. And that's tricky, and that's not easy, because again, Gnosticism is going to places where angels fear to tread. And maybe that's the whole point. Angels and gods and those who believe union with Ein Sof is just an attitude need not apply. Take the blue pill, have a steak with Cypher and Agent Smith, and ejaculate your ego in the bliss that is ignorance. This reminds me of a saying in the Gospel of Thomas that I think so many have confused with pantheism, and that notion spirituality is just going through a metaphysical drive-through. Jesus said, I am the light that is over all things. I am all. From me all came forth, and to me all attained. Split a piece of wood, I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there. People assume it means Jesus is everywhere, but they seem to miss the part where Jesus talks about action. Yes, action. You know, lifting the stone, splitting the wood. Sorry, there's hard ego-killing work to be done, my beloved truth seekers. Gnosticism doesn't promise you a rose garden, but it does guarantee that thorns will scrape you to the very bone. Like the letter of Peter to Philip says, the archons are fighting against the inner man. Your mind and soul and body are just the scorched battlefields, and they are also the price you'll pay for Gnosis. But the rewards, the rewards are beyond belief, beyond imagination, beyond explanation, beyond the beyond. But in the meantime, you can rest at the virtual Alexandria, you pilgrims and passerbyers and questing knights for the pearl of great price. You can rest by the sparkling fountain and the statue of Hermes Trismegistos and the forgotten gods. Sit back and continue writing your own gospel and living your own myth, and make that attempt to rescue Hypatia from the Christian mob as she tries to make it home this time. I am Abraxas, broadcasting at the virtual Alexandria through the GodAboveGod.com. The road has ended, the song is over, thought I'd have something more to say. But don't cultivate any troubles, my beloved truth seekers, because like heaven above you, the spy that loved you, I'm keeping all of your secrets safe with me tonight. Hello and goodbye as always.